For our final keynote before our lunch break, we have Connor O'Shea to talk about the real-world blockchain use cases. And I'm not sure how many of you guys saw or left comments on our Instagram posts, but to everyone who left the comments on our Instagram and Twitter posts that blockchain is a scam with no real-world applications, this is definitely the panel for you. Connor works in business development for Binance, so let's everyone please give him a warm welcome to the stage.
All right, everyone. My name's Connor O'Shea. Thank you all for coming out. I'm currently with BNB Chain, and I'd like to start by kind of giving you a little bit about my origin story, why you should listen to me effectively, what's the kind of value add, if you will. So I began my journey with digital currencies, actually starting with both EverQuest, if you're familiar, in 1999, probably before most of your time. I actually dropped out of high school here in Georgia as a freshman. We coded bots together that would effectively run algorithms in various games. We eventually moved on to World of Warcraft, generating either gold or in-game currency, and then selling that to wholesalers. So we ran that business for about 5 or 6 years here in Atlanta. And then eventually we came into an interesting dilemma where majority of the players in that space, Sony Online Entertainment at the time, and then later Blizzard, and then eventually EVE Online, began to realize that it was actually more profitable to sell their own currency rather than actually sell copies of the game. And you'll see that now playing out with Fortnite and all of that. So once the major publishers moved into that space, our business model was effectively over, and we had to kind of all of us found a way to reinvent ourselves. Our CTO at the time actually went to Georgia Tech. He's an alumnus, and I was a little bit of the more business guy, if you will. So I left, I got my GED, I went to a school up in Boston, and then I decided that I really wanted to try my hand effectively at consulting. So I joined Booz Allen Hamilton, worked with PwC as well in their financial services practice, taking the experience that I had working with those sort of super early digital currencies in the early 2000s and dealing with government interaction and how that could grow was a very good fit, what we called FIG at the time, which is Financial Institutions Groups. So I worked with various banks all over the world, and I guess the key takeaway that I had from working in that space was how you could, how would you say, set kind of a vision and a strategy for your entity, right? So if you work with C-suiters, you kind of figure out like, hey, what are they trying to build? And the reason why I reference this is as I go through my presentation, I want to kind of touch on the applicable use cases of blockchain, right? Because you could spend 25 hours talking about all the different cool things that you could do, with a shark minted NFT in Bermuda. But that's not necessarily something that, say, the CEO of Pfizer is going to be interested in. There are things that they are, and I'll reflect upon that. And I was thinking about exactly how to kind of reflect each of these verticals that I spent time in. And as I started, I knew what it meant to be a founder, to build a company, to generate revenue, to start from nothing, and then to taste bitter defeat and watch it get destroyed. And to keep going, which is something that hopefully those of you who are building out your own Web3 practices or projects will hopefully not experience, but if you do, it's something that you'll be able to take in stride and hopefully continue to push forward and reinvent yourself, as my team eventually did. That was effectively kind of the main takeaway that I had from my time as a founder. I spent 7 years in strategy working for, as I said, various firms, Tokyo, London, New York, but mostly working with executives trying to figure out how to build their vision and understand what they wanted to achieve. And at each of these points, I also had an interesting kind of experience that pushed me forward and catapulted me into the next pillar, as you will. So losing, my business that I started originally with my friends due to competitive forces of major corporations was a big driving force. What pushed me out of consulting actually is I remember very vividly, my team had sat down with a CEO, and I won't say the industry or the vertical, and we had pitched an idea for him in terms of how he could grow his business. And he kind of chuckled, and he said, "I've hired and fired 1,000 of you. You'll probably be 1,001, Give me something tangible that I can take to my board to grow my business that no one else that's going to pitch before you or after you will be able to show me. And I had nothing. And we had spent time talking about cultural change, right, or different, cloud technology services. You can move your infrastructure out. He's like, man, I've heard all of this. I'm not paying you for that kind of speak. And then I realized effectively that I didn't have depth. I didn't have extensive subject matter expertise the way that, say, my founder did, who obviously the GTLM I spoke with. And I realized that I didn't necessarily just want to be selling kind of academic, as some of the people I worked with referred to me, as academic approaches. So I decided it was time to leave. And I raised this with my partner, and he said, well, look, you started with this business in currency. You've spent 7 years advising banks and governments. Why don't you try taking your hand in an actual industry with a group of people who are actually building the business and making it work? So he was able to get me an interview with, at the time, the CFO of JP Morgan. I joined her office as a kind of an advisor. And then I would later rotate through my time at JP Morgan and in different divisions, mostly in the investment bank, which sounds confusing because that's where their payments team actually is. So when you think of payments globally, that actually sits in the investment bank, not in a kind of a commercial bank, though I did work with them. And I advised and counseled both CTOs and other sort of market leaders in that firm and in that space on their competitive interests. And when I joined JP Morgan, I thought of JP Morgan as like this kind of like HBS lacrosse, kind of these guys and girls that are doing, deals up in Connecticut and kind of M&A and kind of the stuff you see in Hollywood. And I could not be further from the truth. And the first time I sat down in a meeting that Jamie Dimon was present, for instance, one of the first things that he had done was he sets the order in which people speak to him based upon the priority of the business. In the retail business, specifically, customer checking accounts always goes first. And the investment bank, where I sat at the time, always goes last because it is considered to be the least important aspect of the business, which is my first sort of key takeaway for the audience here is you want to go where your customers are. So just have that in mind. You can have a technical idea, you can have a product-specific idea, but ultimately your prioritization should always be customer first. And you'll see other executives like Bezos and others kind of iterate on that. So then the question became, okay, well, Connor, how did you get to Binance? Why did you go from being a suit effectively to getting out of JP and into the crypto and blockchain scene? And obviously, if you guys follow Jamie Dimon at all, you'll see he's extremely negative publicly on crypto. And one of my earliest projects, I was basically asked for my team to go in and do just kind of like a quick analysis on how much potential cost savings the firm could get had we implemented some sort of blockchain tech, right? Or it's like, look, there's all this technology, right? There's like a bunch of kids at GT going to conferences. What is this actually, what's my, back to that original CEO, right? Who's running hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue. It's like, what does this actually mean for me? Like, why do I care? There's a bunch of kids speculating on coins. Like, these are the kinds of things they'll say in kind of in a conference room behind the scenes. And I had read about distributed ledger tech, which seemed to be something that was interesting. So I sat down, and me and my team, we all worked together, and we opened Excel, and I was thinking that I'd get to a few $1 million in terms of savings. And then I started looking at the overall business, and I realized really, very, very, very rapidly I'd be looking at a minimum of hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. And it became extremely clear to me that this will be the future, and that I'm not the first person, certainly, to come to that conclusion. However, I started sort of going deeper into the firm, looking at what JP was doing in that space. And JP has this massive army of consumer deposits, foreign exchange, private banking, credit cards for those of you who are in, Sapphire, whatever other partner loyalty programs, right? So this massive network of people all over the world where they're either doing huge debt deals or moving money around. They have custody services, all these other aspects. And when you kind of look at what that takes, like what does it take, for instance, for you to run a credit card? And I'll get to that later on, but think of all the plastic that you have to mint. Think of all the paperwork, all the checks that have to be done. Think of the call centers. Think of the fraud teams, think of the lawyers, right? And in every geography in every country in the world. And then remember that JP doesn't own that payment network, right? In many cases, it's Visa or MasterCard or other payment processors behind the scenes, right? So you have this entire giant paper-based or Excel-based bureaucracy that's running this. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people, potentially even millions of people around the world who build and maintain all this infrastructure. And it became very, very clear to me quickly that you could streamline a lot of that effectively if you had the right tools and technology, which our world and Web3 provides. So I looked at getting into a team and realized very quickly that would be very, very difficult to do. Because ultimately, I didn't think that JP had the cultural mandate or the engineering or the knowledge to be able to make that change. So I looked around for what I thought was the best, at least for me, based upon my experience, crypto company, and that led me to Binance. I joined Binance about a year ago, and after that, ultimately, I decided that I wanted to specialize in BNB Chain, so I left and I joined the BNB Chain Foundation effectively, which is where kind of all the action is. That's where the newest tech is being built. That's where all the founders are. That's where our incubation goes. That's where our investment goes. That's where we're really looking for the new and the interesting projects, so to speak. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'll keep going for the sake of time. So part of the reason why I chose Binance, and I knew none of this effectively when I first logged in, so I'm just going to flip through some of this stuff quickly. Similar to JP Morgan in terms of market share, JP had 50% of households in America have a consumer relationship with them. Binance is even more expansive, surprisingly. So somewhere in the range of 60 to 70% of every trade that's executed in a centralized exchange or through KYC, or depends how you basically view it, goes through Binance. In my wildest dreams in the iBank, we fought for 1% market share. In my wildest dreams. To basically be working at a place that has that 60 to 70% of global market share is incredible and relevant to the other slides I'll go through in a moment. The other piece, similar as I talked about with JP Morgan, is Binance has this huge ecosystem, right? So effectively wallets, everything I talked about before, card, fiat on-off ramp, the decentralized piece, which is where we're now broken off and work with Smart Chain, Trust Wallet, Research Academy, all this stuff, right? So effectively, in many cases for me, when I made the decision to move over, I realized that for me, Binance and BNB Chain are going to sort of be, what at least my thesis is, the modern equivalent of what I used to do at JP. Specifically for BNB Chain, also for those of you who don't know, it's quite large, right? So it's 3 times the size of Ethereum. It's depends on your TVL calculations. There's different ways you can run the numbers. But it is also the largest chain. And having all that context, I kind of want to talk about 5 effectively primary use cases that are important to me for the use of real-world blockchain. Payments, insurance, government, healthcare, and real estate. Now, everybody has different ways that they group these. I have grouped these in this order on the basis of what I think is the most impactful and the most feasible, if that makes sense. I don't want to go super deep into, per se, aspects of the technical side or in a sort of super hypothetical items. For me, again, that CEO who beat it into me, like, give me something aggressive that I can use now. If I'm a builder, if I'm a student at GT, if I want to found a company, like, where do I go? Where do I start? This is effectively where I would start. So the first use case I would bring up is payments. So I know I've already talked a lot about JP. I don't bring this up because necessarily this is where my experience is. I bring this up because I think that this is, quite frankly, the holy grail of blockchain and crypto. I don't know why it's not talked about in such a manner to this degree, but if you think about, like, what is a payment? It's an exchange of goods between 2 people, right? That's pretty simple. But what that also is that's the entire global economy, right? So just take a step back and think about what it means from a payments perspective. Think about how many transactions you make in a day. Think about how many people in the world make a transaction a day, right? So you can get to, 4-6 billion times 20, like, really quick. You get to trillions very, very fast. And all these entities around the world are going through this process, right? So you could have I just threw up the card example of how a credit card works when you swipe your machine. You can see there's, 9 million steps that have been boiled down to 4 icons, right? It's extremely complicated. And there's hundreds of millions of people that do this. And effectively, when you, pay for a transaction, right, you pay $100, the merchant only gets 97, right? So 3 and 4%, in many cases, sometimes 5% of everything that you do gets moved. If you're an international and you need to buy a house and you need to do a foreign exchange payment through JP or some other entity like that, many times your margin is reduced, right? In fees, you'll be absolutely lucky if you can get 1 to 3% through the private bank. Now imagine a world, right, in which you can flip 100 million, or let's just say $1 million, right? You flip $1 million of USDC or BUSD or whatever else you want on the Binance exchange or any other exchange for that matter. That might cost you somewhere in the range of 1 to 2 basis points, which is, or up to 5 basis points depending, which would be 1/100% all the way up to 5/100%. Then you could flip it again through many of these protocols that don't even charge you a fee. And then if they have the right fiat on off-ramp, you could flip it again. So for you to do that same exchange, right, and you as a customer, you guys don't care, right? It doesn't matter to you how complicated this technical background is. You just want to be able to move your money in an appropriate way. And this is just, again, a foreign exchange example. But it goes to basically the Bezos methodology, which he basically says your margin is my opportunity. So this, in terms of total addressable market, in terms of the play, and I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just wanted to emphasize how incredibly, incredibly impactful this is. This is where all the prioritization is at the top. This is where all the funding is going. This aspect of basically moving money around and not paying fees to the exchange is on one area, right? And the other area is all the stuff that you probably don't have a lot of familiar with, which is where I used to live, which is the plumbing behind the scenes of how all this stuff operates, right? Effectively, if you're able to execute this on-chain with some kind of KYC, with some kind of background, in theory, you could reduce the operational costs of these entities by 90% or more. And for those of you who aren't aware, the operational costs of a firm like JP Morgan are in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So if you don't need, right, 100,000 people to go through Excel and check the foreign exchange payments, or to have departments of teams that go and reverse transactions because it's all automatically done through a chain, that savings is both massive for the institution, and that savings is both massive for the consumer. It does press some new problems that arise, namely, effectively, that you'll notice if Apple has its own chain, right, and 2 people pay each other through their iPhone, they don't need Visa for that. Also, they don't need Chase for that. So there's just something to keep in mind about how the corporate landscape might shake out. And that's why I would also advise the founders here to think very closely about where you would insert yourself in the business. So I would direct you to do something in CeFi or something that, or if you're interested in payments, where you hold the customer relationship. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you have invented or you have developed some kind of technology that suddenly is invalidated by the half of the world's population who will just do a transaction through their iPhone and they no longer need you anymore. So just keep that in the back of your head as well of how this disruption will shake out. I'd also direct you, I'll skip it for the sake of time, but you should Google some of this, specifically JP Morgan and other people's work. This is all in the news lately. They are all aggressively moving here in this direction to make these changes. Insurance is a really interesting one as well. Again, not the most interesting topics that you would think about, but let me do some basic math. I'll use a car analogy for everybody. So effectively, think about, you buy a car, let's say you buy a Toyota Camry. You pay $20,000 for it, right? Let's say your full insurance coverage on that is $200. Just do some basic math. So call it $2,400, you hold it for 5 years, you've paid what? $12,000 in insurance, something like that. Obviously, over the 5 years, the value of the car has dropped, probably worth only $12,000 by the end. So over a 5-year holding period, you've probably paid the value of what you would have paid that car in insurance premiums. What percentage of people would actually total that car out? What percentage of people actually claim on their insurance over the course of their life relative to how many of those payments make? The answer is no one, right? It's an amazing business. That's why Warren Buffett loves it. It's a cash cow. And that's not even doing FTV or any other kind of basic TVM calculation on finance, right? Because what the insurance company takes your premium in, you pay them the $200, they go and invest that in equities, they get 10, 20% on all that, right, effectively. And then when you need the insurance company, they don't give you the value of your car. They don't give you the value of the asset, right? They give you the present value, or they go to specific shops. So the cost of them in servicing all this is basically almost nothing. So then you get into this question of okay, well, where does all that money go? So think about an insurance company, just like I described JP Morgan, right? Think about, they got private planes for their executives. They've got offices all over the world. They've got actuaries. They've got traders. They've got tech support teams. They've got 50,000 engineers, right? Go through a 10K sometime of an insurance company and look at all the stuff they're spending and doing. And not only are they spending all that money and doing all that, you as a consumer are getting, if you pay like I said in that analogy, you pay $15,000 over the 5 years. What you're paying for is like a 5% probability that they will give you a small check in the event that you basically take out your car. It's a very bad deal for you as a consumer. So kind of just set that in your mind for a second, and then let me bring up oracles. So for those of you who don't know, oracles is relatively a new technology, and there's a lot of different definitions for them, but let me just describe them as what I would call like an authoritative data source. Effectively, imagine it's like a real-world data pool of information. And let's use temperature and rainfall as an example. So let's say you're a farmer in a developing country and you only have enough money to buy seeds for one crop. And this is a very real use case. This happens all the time. If there's famine or a typhoon or something like that, you are shit out of luck, pardon like my English, and it's really bad, right? And you could literally starve to death. So they don't necessarily have the opportunity to go to an Allianz or some kind of tier 1 insurance company to go. And by the way, even if they did, if you're on the margin, you can't afford to do your $200 premium in the event of some sort of catastrophic disaster, get like 1/4 of your crop back, time adjusted, and go get a lawyer when they try to mess with you. It's just not a viable process. So what you can do, which is some of the projects that I'm working with right now, is you could take out a smart contract, or you could work with an insurance provider or an insurance DAO. And then what that insurance DAO can do is they can tie your GPS coordinates into an oracle that has temperature or rainfall to it. So if you live in a monsoon, right, you can pay $200 in Ethereum or BNB or whatever else that you want. And then in the event of basically like a monsoon or a water event or whatever else that would happen, the smart contract would execute, right, based upon an automatic reconciliation with an oracle that has that kind of temperature and weather data, and then you get a payout, right? And your payout will probably be, instead of the insurance company getting 95% plus benefit of the cash flows and the investment that's moving around, maybe the DAO takes 1% for the management of the oracle and all the other stuff, but effectively your payout on a $200 smart contract could be like $10,000 or something like that. Right? And it would adjust through statistics and all that. But the point is that you remove a lot of the bureaucracy and you make life for the consumer or the end user infinitely better, if that makes sense to everybody. So there are a lot of extremely practical use cases that both benefit the business in terms of streamlining and benefit the consumer in terms of the use case. I'll go into another one. I know the images are kind of shady in terms of like their structure. I needed to align them properly, but do the best that I can with what I have. We have 2 examples here on the government side, which I think will be quite impactful. So one, the government of Kazakhstan is moving into building their own CDCs, central bank digital currencies. I should not abbreviate for all of you. Effectively, what we're doing here is we're helping them to move out of fiat. So instead of the Fed actually running a printer, we want them to actually mint money and have that complete visibility on chain. Obviously, there's pros and cons of this. This is the public version. We're also working with governments that maybe are having problems with their neighbors. I don't know if you guys follow the news in that regard. So we're trying to help them follow this same protocol of effectively moving in and moving out of fiat into a digital world, which has many benefits, but also many challenges. Other elements that I might draw you to in terms of very practical use change with the government, Social Security, right? If you can imagine what a labyrinth of a nightmare that is. I mean, just imagine if everybody just had a smart contract address or some sort of wallet address that the government would issue, Social Security wallet, and then government would just issue the check to you immediately through that transaction. I know obviously many of you are quite young. You're probably not. I don't know if you've worked with kind of like your elderly parents or anything like that. But I hope as you gain that experience of what fun it is working with large governmental institutions, you'll be able to appreciate the use case there. And then another item I also had thought about, which other governments are exploring. You've seen friction around elections, voting, all of that. You would, in theory, particularly blockchain could be a very specific solution, right? Where everybody gets a private key and a public key. Everybody could vote through a blockchain. You'd have privacy, but then you'd be able to verify it. Obviously, that's a hot topic globally around the world. Brazil is going through this right now. So that would be another sort of core issue and use case. I didn't make separate slides for the other two. For the sake of time, I'll jump through it quickly. I'd like to kind of touch on those main areas, right? So not having economic benefit to the customer, huge paper-based bureaucratic work on the left-hand side. That's where all your use cases are in blockchain. So healthcare, right? Think about identity, you have to find ways to be HIPAA compliant and other issues. But anything that's this kind of horrible, laborious process with 20 different systems on 5 different cloud providers and a bunch of Dell servers sitting in a rack somewhere, that's really where your opportunities are. So healthcare is there. Real estate, same thing, right? Like if you're working with deeds, insurance, all this stuff where you have all these paperwork, somebody effectively is going to be able to go to the state of Georgia and say, hey, can I take your entire database of deeds and legislation, everything else, and just package it in this nice, neat little chain that will then process for you. I don't know who will be there, who will be the first to go, but I do think that those are the practical use cases. I think that's where the investment is going to go. That's where the venture capitalists are going to want to see you move as well. And we would encourage you to partner with us on that journey as well. So as you think about those items, definitely reach out. You're welcome to find myself on LinkedIn or on the team, and we'd be happy to kind of help you on the journey. Obviously, as I've shown you, we have that kind of wide product set, but there's many different chains and there's many different areas for you to work on and develop in. And I'd encourage you to look at that entire ecosystem in totality. If you have any other questions, please reach out. Thank you very much.